So from a completely new way of thinking about storage to a completely new way of thinking about production workflows, but using the visual effects pipeline as an example of that. And to present on this, we have two people. We have Jack Watts, who's got huge experience of working in motion picture production. He's worked at Technicolor and Deluxe. He now has his own consultancy. He's an expert in DCP and IMF. And to present with him, Tomasz Witowski, who is the senior workflow engineer at Sundog Media Toolkit. And he's also spent a career in the kind of muck and bullets of production in the trenches on everything from commercials and independent films through to Hollywood movies, also an expert in DCP and IMF. And delighted to have you both here. Over to you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mark.
So actually, we don't need to say our names anymore.
No, we don't need to introduce ourselves. This is great.
Yeah, fantastic. So welcome, everyone. I hope you are not sleeping, and we'll do this quick, nice, and we'll show some scary content. So
yeah, so I'm going to start, but one of the things I just want to confirm with you guys is you saw in the title visual effects. Now, visual effects is a very, very, very broad subject matter, and if we were to talk about all aspects of it, we would be here for a lot longer than just 30 minutes. So for the purpose of this presentation, we're focusing on the motion graphics component of visual effects and the general graphical textual design surrounding the actual components that comprise general content to which we all work with. Because this content is important because we want to then show how that, or say that these components of this content is important because we want to show how that ties into actual mezzanine format. And when it comes to mezzanine formats, one of the most important things to remember as well is that the quality of your mezzanine format is not just about the integrity of the image and audio data, but more specifically, the integrity and wholeness of the metadata pertaining to that essence. Because without that metadata, we cannot leverage the benefits of the simple recycle and reuse concept within the content lifecycle here.
yeah, I actually like it to recycle to avoid the waste. So on the right side, we got the production and post-production. On the left side, there is a user experience and what kind of the data you can collect. If you have a chance yesterday to watch a presentation from the Movie Lab, a future content creation. So in theory, in 10 years' time, it will be possible that everything will be in the cloud and the workloads will be defined by storage. As quickly you can access your data, then you can make all the processes. But let's go to our case. I don't know how many people know about IMF in here. I just double check. Okay. How many people know about VFX Pipeline? And how many people know about color pipeline? Okay, so we'll explain all these terms. But before that, we'll show small content. So it's a British and independent production. But the producer is our friend, and he asked, can you combine different technology, look how we can improve our production and post-production for the distribution purposes? Because in next year, there is a finish on the VPF, virtual print fee in the cinemas, and many films which is independent can be actually distributed in the cinemas but without any fee in the different countries. So I think that so many different films will appear in the cinema. So
yeah, it's also just worth to note that the trailer you're about to see was created exclusively for the purpose of our use case, to which we're going to be explaining to you today and walking you through it. So hopefully you'll enjoy it. Thank you.
yeah, it's only 2 minutes though.
Please tell me there's Wi-Fi.
I don't care about Wi-Fi. There's a pool. Group photo? 3, 2, 1, photo!
Stompo went to the festival. Thought you guys might like to come.
Could be fun.
I promise you'll remember it for the rest of your lives.
Mark down your fear and make your offering.
It was the very important thing to go and understand a face your fear and sacrilege and the end credits. Let's start from the basics of the color pipeline. So once you get the footage from the camera, it's actually raw footage. You need to apply the color grading on the CDLs, so you can keep this. Then you can apply your auto transforms and then calibrate the monitors, and then you get the offline proxy. So the CDLs is a color decision list, so it's very important to keep all the information, but you cannot apply the output transfers before the color decision. So the most important thing that everyone need to have information about color pipeline, how it's work and how it's look. Over to you, Jack.
Thanks, Tom. So as we meander through the multiple workflows that are going to unveil themselves on screen behind us, all these workflows are what actually kind of comprise the overall pipeline from post-production all the way down through the delivery. You may notice that we have a kind of a swim lane thing happening here, and the purpose of this is to kind of showcase just how disconnected all these various stages within the post-production through the delivery process is actually currently situated, where you have multiple individuals or multiple facilities all working to achieve the same goal, which is to create that final original version that people will be able to version against. As I mentioned, they're disconnected, which means often people are operating in a siloed capacity. And one of the problems that we have seen is that there is no agreed or defined interchange of data. So nothing is actually properly structured, because without a lot of people here may not realize is one of the main forms of communication on a project from post all the way into actual vendors for versioning is still email. And if anything, yes, believe it or not, text messages that drive the actual notification mechanisms. Now, separate to that as a tie-off is the visual effects pipeline. Now, within a general visual effects workflow, there is multiple information, such as data and peripheral source material that is actually generated by a respective artist to create a finished shot that will eventually go in to comprise a sequence amongst other shots. One of the fundamental problems is this information that is created is never really handed off for further downstream purposes. So it actually is preventing any sort of efficiencies that can be leveraged downstream by reusing this information at the versioning stage.
So again, we are focused on the motion titles replacement. So in this occasion, tracking and rotoscoping and the 3D modeling and the lighting is very important. So we don't need to do the rigging. Small animations apply, and the texturing and shading is needed.
So one of the things that we have explored and seen is OpenTimeline IO. Just if I can see anybody, how many people have heard of this? Oh, great, fantastic. So It is a interchange and API framework that enables the exchange of the editorial timeline information. It is not an essence container, which is great in that it only references the media. Some of the features that actually allows us to leverage some benefits is that, first of all, it's open source. And then you have the shot, frame, time code information, the actual shot status, all the actual information that various technical and creative talent require can easily be updated because it actually implements a form of version control within the actual timeline format. And with utilizing the adapters, you have the means to actually convert to other timeline formats and then guarantee a valid reference to the external media through media linkers. And then in order to control or govern the mechanism of how all that happens, you can leverage the power of hook scripts and then utilize schema definitions within OpenTimeline itself to actually generate bespoke or custom implementations for yourself specifically that may lay outside of the generic OpenTimeline framework.
So now we know all the basics, that's correct? So
yeah, exactly. So when it gets handed off, you're actually allowing greater efficiencies and from a time perspective in terms of turnaround that you're avoiding the deduplication of both operational and technical tasks by saving time on simple little things like mastering, regrading, QC, and general compositing.
as we know, it costs a lot of money for many different people and always want to solve the costs. So once we got all this information, now we can back to the case study. So this is the view of the trailer on per shot. So it's a 55 shots. Please look for Face Your Fear. It should be Face of Fear, or it should be like something different? What do you think?
Probably like change your perspective in terms of how componentized media should be actually mastered.
Change your perspective. Okay. So in this occasion, we have 55 shots, and the next slide is like showing that we got this on the timeline. But on the mezzanine formats, normally you don't see the cuts. So EDL is not transformed to the mezzanine formats. So for example, if you got some masters for TV, you're using a ProRes 444. If you got different masters, you just got totally different information. It's very hard to retrieve this information because the production has been finished. So we try to understand how we can take the EDL, so
edit decision list.
Exactly, and color a decision list, and transform this to IMF. So there is a pretty simple mapping which we explain later, but in here you got this is exactly this trailer, so 5.1 audio. So in this trailer, we especially didn't use a dissolve. We used very basic information. So how you transform this to the IMF? Is it like single segment?
Well, so basically the mezzanine format, of course, that I was alluding to earlier on, is in fact IMF, which stands for the Interoperable Master Format. And although I saw a good lot of hands in the room, I did see some that kept their hands down. So for those of you who are not aware of what IMF is, it is a file-based framework that is comprised of modular-based metadata and referenced MXF wrapped image, audio, and time text data that when manipulated by a file-based system allows you to create other file formats for delivery for downstream platforms. In our example here, we essentially have our original textless sequence that is actually laid out in a continuous fashion, but utilizing a virtual marker track, we can actually place in our composition sections on a frame level that indicates at what point in time there is a textless sequence that would need to be required for versioning purposes later on. Now, I think we can move on to the next one.
Yeah, actually I want to mention about this one because it's actually pretty cool.
Go ahead.
Because in theory, I love to see all the cuts for the whole film, for example, or program for each shot in actually CPL. So CPL is a composition playlist in IMF. That mezzanine format definitely got all the information about shots. If somebody want to replace something in the future, yes, you can do so. But it's not happening yet, so is the reason we use the markers. But I wish to keep each shot as a separate MXF. I hope it's big happening. So in here, on this case study, we need to replace, for the versioning purposes, a board 1, which is a face, board 2, which is a fear, face your fear, and then untitled, sacrilege, and then credits. So this is a very typical way how you using the trailers and the boards. So sometimes it's a main title on the front. If you know at front exactly what shots you need to replace, and you track this from the mezzanine format, any different vendor can actually create this with no issues because they can go in the information. However, we are placing a shot, these shots, we focus on the shot 40 on the automated form, so fear. And if we take these elements and try to recreate that on the textless version, so the process is going in theory, you tap fear, then you prepare your shots with the already graded content, then you actually bake in the effect, then apply the CDS and the colors, and then you actually can put this on the timeline. So in this occasion, so you go to the CDM and then go to the JPEG and then put this on the timeline. So in theory, in the workflow is to prepare any language what you have, and you got your font, which was used for the motion titles. In theory, everything should work. So, timeline replacement, and then you can go for each shots, and then you can create at least 100 different language versions and replace these shots. We know exactly that sometimes 5 seconds content to create from the scratch is causing so much big problems. But the 5 seconds content when you're creating, it can take, for example, 1 day because of so many different issues with the prepare of the files. But in this occasion, we can, for example, in 1 day, create at least 800 different versions by using automated workflows on this way because we got all the information, what is required to make this on this way. So let's explain how we can map IMF to, OpenTimeline to IMF.
OpenTimeline to IMF. Okay. So now to put a bit of visual context to what we talked about earlier on or through the entirety of this presentation, we've got OpenTimeline.io, which is effectively sitting on top of a metadata bank because we talked about information that effectively is all being funneled into the main category that is metadata. Now this metadata has to be indexed and stored in a particular manner. How you do that is up to you. So looking at, for the purpose of this example, we're just simply put it into a centralized metadata bank. Now this could also be integrated into a peripheral media asset management system of your choice if that's what you wanted to go forward with. But what we also have through both the media linkers and adapter functionality, the simple editorial workflow within the actual timeline capacity of both your actual main sequence, in this case EXOR, and then your proxy sequence for editorial work. Because now we've already indicated as to what specific frames and the duration of those sequences, we know explicitly where and how we want to create our track files. So we can actually exchange this across to another separate middleware stack, and then utilizing another open source tool set called AskDCPlib, we can create our texted and texted sequence-specific ASO2 track files. We can then bundle in a very structured manner the respective metadata and OpenTimeline information data into an actual sidecar composition map, which we can then ingest into a mastering appliance, which an operator, or if we're at a point where some form of assisted solutions can in fact create an IMP. So now if we move on to the next slide, we can talk about the breakdown of where we are within an actual simple localization workflow where IMF is concerned. Now, we've created our texted and textless sequences, both with their own specific MXF track files, but they're both referenced by two separate compositions. So you can often use your texted composition playlist as a guide, but for your textless element, this is the one that we're actually going to ingest into our localization tool for whatever purposes that we could actually then, for the purpose of this example, bring our metadata into and work with. In this case, we talked about wanting to replace titles. So as you can see here, we have a font file and a textless element. So the font file is installed, and the compositor is able to work with that within its compositing tool. And then the README text file carries the respective information that the compositor would actually need, which is the various attributes as to what that font should look like, and the generic stylized attributes as to what he needs to create in order to create the final graphic localized sequence. But it doesn't just stop at text. So in other parts of the trailer, you did notice that there was sections with the girls and her eyes and the bleeding. In some markets, you have censorship requirements where, from a promotional standpoint, that type of content or those shots may be the only thing they're actually greenlit for marketing purposes, but it's essentially R-rated content. So it actually needs to be watered down. That means a visual effects artist of some sort needs to go in and remove all this information and paint her back to make her appearance look normal. So we've already created this information earlier on in our visual effects pipeline. So we're going to repurpose it here. So you can use general roto mats, I say roto information and additional mats to facilitate that additional censorship and paintwork requirement. But it's one thing I want to bring up here as well, Tom, and it's, you know, in the days when we were all versioning, back in the early days for the versioning market, it was extremely frustrating not having this information. And I'm just going to talk to you for about 30 seconds about a specific title sequence that had to be versioned at one point. I'll leave the name and the owners out of the equation. But it took 2.5 weeks, 2 dedicated artists, and 1 third-party animator. That could have been achieved in a day, because they spent the entire time deconstructing that sequence to generate the actual peripheral data that was required in order to service the localization process for them to recreate the animation in the respective language for the market that was going to. Because when this original information was generated and created at the OV stage in the final edit, the actual creative sign-off probably would have been the director or a delegate of the director. But that's important to note, because that means the director just didn't sign off that final shot. They signed off the actual peripheral and source material that was generated by that original artist, which means that the quality of that source material that original artist created has now been preserved down to the actual new artist in a specific facility and God knows where in the world that is now actually going to be creating this localized instance. The amount of information and time that is lost in this exchange of where this information is and the creation of this information is a big problem in the industry, as it is a massive cost problem to the people who are actually working on this. So by allowing or creating a process by incorporating all that information into the simple workflow that you see in front of us, essentially allows an artist or a compositor in this case to simply monitor a pipeline as everything is simply generated and then incorporated into various additional IMF packages of whatever application of your choosing that can then be sent off to additional facilities for further processing.
Okay, so conclusion, we got a couple of minutes only, and then we need to take the question if any is there. So conclusion is, it's avoid misconception. So it's very important the systems can read the other systems and all the information are readable for any system what you're using. I don't think about softwares in general.
Because ultimately, there is no one-size-fits-all at the moment. A lot of the solutions that people are using are very siloed and disconnected in their ability. So customization is key right now. And there's a lot of pre-qualification with the actual material that you're working with that is required. that's just not from a technical level, but also on the business layer in terms of the business rules of how they should be processed, adhering to the various security guidelines and client approval recommendations for that content.
And the file preparation is very important, how you prepare your file before any production, because the spec is so important. Because sometimes there is a very big spec with information how you need to deliver the content, but what is happening before the delivery the content for the versioning the purposes is always missing. So the file preparation is very needed. Without that automation cannot happen.
And ultimately, the only way forward really to achieve natural automation is for the industry as a whole to sit down and consensually agree about, for a consensual vernacular as to how data should be structured and interchanged between facilities.
And also there is another conclusion, which is a technical conclusion. OpenTimeline IO is still missing the information of the color. So that's one, it should be proposed and implemented because it's been much easier. And I'm recommending 2 articles for you to read as well. So I'm recommending a Movie Labs article to read about the future of content creation. And also, if you got the time, with Richard Welsh, we write an article about media workflows. So in the cloud, I think it would be beneficial to show how the processes of the media content creation is disconnected. I think in this occasion
It's time for your questions.
Say thank you.
done.
Yeah. You got another picture you want to show us? You good? All right, you ready for questions? Tom and Jack, what do you got out there? Anybody have questions for these guys? Of course, Nick. Is it about DNA?
No, and I always have questions. So just on the OpenTimeline IO, we have a bunch of different types of applications. You didn't speak to all of them that use timelines. I'm just thinking we have audio as well, video, color, VFX, compositing, probably missing a few. Is OpenTimeline IO essentially going to address the exchange of data between any of these class of applications eventually, or are there limits to what that specification is trying to accomplish? And I'm also curious, how far along are vendors in actually implementing this and proving out that they can exchange their timelines with other types of applications?
Unfortunately, right now, it still comes back to it being the implementation of it or the adoption of OpenTimeline is still very much vendor specific, and not everybody is actually using it. One of the main utilizations of it is, when you can see it, is Pixar have adopted it, and actually one of the main people that have spearheaded it for managing their actual renders as they come off their farm when they prepare them.
So we're still going to need some 2019 version of automatic duck for certain things?
Yes.
Okay.
But it's the whole idea of the IMF that is actually serving a storage, because you just replace the shots, what you want to replace, and then you can create as many CPLs as you wish, and you have the control way of the replacing the CPLs. And then you can package as you desire as well, so if any edit is happening, and you can transform that, so you can keep the another version in the sidecars.
Hi, Annie Chang, mother of IMF. Thank you for.
No.
No, thank you for finding something interesting here about the using IMF on that. I actually more wanted a clarification. So the case study that you did, is it more for like localization and censorship dub, like versioning basically is what you're proposing, or do you see a somehow a way to actually get further upstream into the visual effects process?
You got to start somewhere, right? So this is kind of coming from one of our main backgrounds, is seeing the way to kind of increase the efficiencies within that global localization piece, and then build on that. But kind of get people to be more vocal in terms of what their use cases are, and break down these silo barriers on a facility level, because it is scary when you go into places just how different everybody is doing things. Some of them very obtuse, some of them influenced by legacy workflows where there's been hindrances in able to progress. When ultimately I know there's, at the end of the day, it's a business and everybody's trying to make money, but we are all trying to achieve the same thing, be able to deliver quality as fast and as accurately as possible. And I just found that at the time, like for this case study, that the localization piece really satisfied where OpenTimeline's functionality currently is, and how that can dovetail into IMF and actually truly leverage the componentized framework that IMF actually has to offer over the existing primarily tape-based linear playout that people are still using.
Cool. Thank you.
Thanks, Annie.
Thank you.
Any other questions out there? All right, please give it up for Tom and Jack.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.